Do people with low self esteem know they have low self esteem? The answer, it depends on a person's defense mechanisms. All right. Simple enough. Actually, wrong. It's not simple. That's the whole point. It depends on a person's defense mechanisms, how extreme the person's defense mechanisms are. And I will explain a little bit about that. I'm Dr. Seth, psychologist. And when we talk about low self esteem, the first point I want to make is that a mistake people often make when it comes to self esteem. And that is they tend to think of self esteem, a person's self esteem, as either good or bad. So a person either has good self esteem or, the opposite. They have bad self esteem. It doesn't work like that. And many of you may already know that. For you watching this video, ask yourself that very basic question. What kind of self esteem do you think you have? In a word, how would you describe your self esteem? All right. Now, here's another way to think about it. Let's think about self esteem on a 1 to 10 scale. 10 is the best, strongest, healthiest self esteem you could possibly have, and 1 is the least. What number would you give yourself if you think about your own self esteem? All right. Now, odds are, and it probably doesn't take a psychologist to figure this one out, odds are you didn't give yourself a 1 or a 10. You probably gave yourself a number somewhere in between a 1 and a 10. And that actually is your proof that you understand that a person doesn't have completely good or completely bad self esteem. And I think one of the healthiest ways to think about our self esteem, because we all have a self esteem, is to think about it as pockets of self esteem. So maybe you have some pockets of good self esteem. On the other hand, maybe there are some pockets, some areas of your life, some areas of your self esteem where your self esteem is lower. All right. Of course, if you have areas of self esteem where it's lower, the goal is to identify what those are, to figure out why would you have that low self esteem in those areas, and then figure out what you can do to change it. And we'll talk about that a little more in a moment. But first, I want to make sure that I go back and properly answer the question, do people who have low self esteem know that they have low self esteem? So, again, because a person who has low self esteem probably doesn't have low self esteem in every single area of their life, they probably have more negative self esteem, more areas where they have low self esteem than positive areas of self esteem. So take that person. Do they know? Would they be able to admit to themselves and to somebody else, yeah, I suffer from, significant low self esteem? The answer is that some people will, and some people will not be able to say that. And here's why it relates to defense mechanisms. One defense mechanism a person can use is called denial. It means just to be absolutely intolerant of even believing that there is such a possibility. The person is in denial that that possibility of them having low self esteem could even exist. They just outright deny it, even though they actually may have some significantly low self esteem. Someone who engages in another defense mechanism, like intellectualization, may tell themselves really intellectual, complex intellectual arguments trying to defend against the idea that they have low self esteem. Someone who engages in intellectualization may come up with very sophisticated intellectual arguments for why everybody, really at root, almost philosophically, does suffer from low self esteem in a world that is so competitive, where there are so many negative forces that can affect someone's ego. So a person may use that defense mechanism to try to tell themselves that they're not different from most people, that they're like everybody else, that if they have low self esteem, well, really, so does everybody. But these are defense mechanisms. The goal is for a person to not need to rely on extreme defense mechanisms in order to see the truth. Now, if a person suffers from significant low self esteem, that shouldn't be any sort of judgment on the person's character or overall value or worth as a person. In fact, if a person suffers from low self esteem in some ways, it simply means there are areas that they need to work on to improve it, right? The issue is, how do we look at a problem? If the problem is significantly low self esteem, well, then what's the solution? As opposed to getting focused on labeling the problem, telling ourselves that the problem is bad, that the problem shouldn't be, a person shouldn't have low self esteem, feeling hopeless or overly cynical. Well, if you have low self esteem, you'll always have low self esteem. That is an example of emotional reasoning. It is not true and it should not be used, especially when we're talking about something as personal as one's self esteem. The goal is to think about it from a solution focused perspective. So let's take this example: a person who is very successful in their professional life. They don't have low self esteem at all when it comes to their career. They believe in their competence. They have good communication at work. They know how to problem solve and execute plans and get them done successfully at work. Well, in romantic relationships, however, that tends to be their Achilles heel. Their romantic relationships are harder for them. They tend to feel insecure. Maybe they get a little obsessive. Maybe they feel overly dependent. They feel a push pull in any close, intimate relationship. So, this may be a source of low self esteem for that person, how they have romantic relationships. At the same time, there may be another area or pocket of their life where they have friendships. And in that area, they're perfectly able to have good, emotionally intimate friendships. So, taking this example of the individual who has high self esteem when it comes to their work life, but has lower self esteem when it comes to their romantic relationship capacity, that is someone who should say, I need to have a solution focused approach to deal with the part of my self esteem that is fledgling, that is vulnerable, that needs more support. They need to identify that part of their life. What do they believe has caused them to have low self esteem in that area? They need to look at the choices they are making today, if they are seeking out people who are good for them, or if the choices they are making are actually making them feel worse, are actually reinstating, reinforcing, reenacting these old beliefs they may have about the fact that they don't have worth, that they are defective in some way. These are all very common beliefs that someone can have when it comes to an area of their life where they have low self-esteem. I'll just share one more example, and that is for somebody, for example, who has really good self-esteem in many areas of their life. Let's imagine they have a good work life, they have a great extracurricular life, they're involved in organizations that interest them, but their friendships often suffer. They have lots of breaks. Maybe they'll get close to somebody for a year, and then maybe they'll sort of have an off period where they need time off and something happened, or they have ruptures in friendships. Maybe they feel distrusting of friendships. That is an area of their life where they may have lower self esteem. They may have beliefs about themselves that cause them to engage in behavior that end up in conflicts, that end up in relationships that are conflicted, friendships that really aren't trusting and healthy for them. This is one example of a person who would then need to say, what do they need to do to learn to have better, more healthy friendships? What do they need to do? They would need to look at the friendships they have. Who are they seeking out? Look at the types of friendships. Do they have a variety of types of friends? Is there a particular type of friend that is tending to make them feel worse about themselves? Are they seeking out the wrong types of friends? Do they want to be friends with people who maybe aren't good for them? Are they focusing on the right characteristics or traits of friends when they look for them? Or are they maybe focusing on certain external characteristics where there is a certain image of that friend they want to keep up, and they're over focusing on that? The point is to be solution focused, identify the problem, and then without spending time judging it, to say, all right, what do we need to do to make it better? That is the goal. We are all works in progress. We are always improving ourselves. And if there are parts of you that have pockets of low self esteem, don't apologize for it. Don't feel bad about it. Don't believe that you are that different from anyone else. Instead, say, I am going to be honest with myself about the pockets of my self esteem that need a little work, and I'm going to do what I need to do to make it better. That is not about defense mechanisms. That is about honesty and acceptance mixed with a very pragmatic, practical, problem solving perspective. All right. I hope this video has been helpful. I also hope you may find any of my hundreds of other self improvement videos here helpful on my YouTube channel, Dr. Seth Psychologist. Have a good one, everybody.